Good afternoon, and you're very welcome to Let's Talk About Climate Change, brought to you by Cork County Council in collaboration with UCC as part of Sustainable Development Goals Promotion 2022. The Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs as they're known, are a collection of 17 interlinked global goals to transform our world. Fixed by the United Nations and adopted by 193 countries, their overall objective is to create a better world and a better life for all in 2030. Goal 13 is about climate action, and that's what we're talking about today. I'm Mary O'Neill and I'm chairing today's webinar. During the next 50 minutes or so, we're going to get an intergenerational view of climate change with some frank and honest discussions. Today is all about starting conversations. We love to talk in Ireland, and even though we're well able to talk about the weather, when it comes to bigger discussions around climate action, it can be a topic people avoid. We have some special guests joining us shortly to chat about speaking to all age groups about climate change. But first, let's cross over to Louis Duffy, Director of Service, Environment, Climate Change and Emergency Services with Cork County Council, to say a few words.
Thank you, Mary. As Mary has told you, I work for Cork County Council. As Director for Environmental Services in Cork and the Regional Climate Action Office, I have been immersed in climate change science for many years. Climate change has been around for all time. From the Ice Ages to modern times, the world has been changing. And that is one reason why climate change deniers can say that what we're doing is making no difference. But it is. We must reduce our use of energy. Since 2009, Cork County Council has improved its energy efficiency by 30%. We have retrofitted our buildings, put in new heating systems, bought more efficient vehicles, and we are replacing all the street lighting across the county with LEDs to save 8 million kilowatt hours of electricity every year. But we must do more. We cannot stop the change, but we can limit it. This year, 2022, will go down in history as the year when we could all see the impact that our activities have had on climate, with records being broken for storms, high temperatures, droughts and flooding. Flooding continues to challenge many of our towns, and in partnership with the OPW we have installed and operate flood defence systems that will protect our homes and our businesses. It's time for everyone to change and reduce the impact that our activities have on our climate. We in the local authority sector have been asked to develop climate action plans for our counties, not just for what the councils do, but for everything that happens in our county. It would be pointless, though, for us to just put a team of engineers and scientists into a room to write a plan without talking to the people that it will affect. That's you. We want to talk to you. We hope that you want to talk to each other and to us. What is important to you? What will you gain or lose if we change nothing? We need to make some hard decisions. We may have to make some sacrifices. What are we prepared to give up to ensure that our children have a better place to live? We've had over 100 years of linear consumption, where we used the world's resources and then threw the remainder away. We now have seas filled with plastics and the air filled with carbon dioxide. Climate migration has begun due to drought, erosion and storms. We can't fix it all at once, and maybe not at all. But if we can work together to decide what's important, maybe we can leave this world a better place than it would be if we kept going as we are. So where do we start? We will continue to work with the science, but we need you to talk to each other and to us so that we can work together. Our scientists are measuring the carbon footprint of our county so that we can plan to reduce emissions. Our engineers are working to develop solutions to climate risks. How can we adapt our roads for all the flooding and the melting tar? What can we do about coastal erosion? That will tell us what we can do, but it's by having a real conversation about it that we can work out what we should change and what is best for all.
Thanks very much, Louis, for those really insightful words. Now, I'd like to introduce our special guests on today's webinar. They are Alannah Wrynn, a sixth year student from West Cork and a climate activist, and American psychologist Professor Mick Smyer. Mick is the former provost and an emeritus professor of psychology at Bucknell University in the US, and he's founder and CEO of Growing Greener Climate Action for a Warmer World. He's a national expert and has written and lectured extensively. Along with holding leadership roles in national organisations, Mick has also consulted with Fortune 500 companies, state and national legislative leaders, and higher education organisations. He draws insights from psychology, climate communication strategies, and behavioural scientists to work on programmes of change with all generations. Mick, it's lovely to meet you. We wanted to start this webinar with the younger generation and what impact climate change is having not just on their lives but on their minds, which is why I'm delighted to introduce you to 17-year-old Alannah Wrynn from West Cork. Alannah is a sixth year student from Dunmanway. Growing up on a farm, the natural world has always played an important role in her life. She's an active member of Fridays for Future Cork, and she is very involved in sustainable methods of food production. She serves as the chairperson of Corlin and Oak, the Youth Council, and is a delegate of the Irish National Youth Assembly. Alannah is going to put some questions to you about your specialist topics. I think audiences will really enjoy this discussion. So I'm going to hand over to you both.
I suppose the first question that we have for you is, what do you think is the best way to talk to children about climate change? And I know especially with eco-anxiety kind of resurfacing, we've kind of become more conscious of it. And I think a lot of parents would be afraid perhaps of causing eco-anxiety in their kids if they talk about the topic in a way that's maybe insensitive. So like, what's the best way of doing it?
Well, that's a great question, Alannah. And first, let me thank you and Mary for having me here. Um, in the United States, the National Academy of Sciences says the best way to talk to kids of any age, and actually I think it's the best way to talk to anybody of any age, is to keep it social, short, and positive. Social by focusing on people or places that you care about. Short by focusing on a human scale time frame. For example, in the work that we do, we focus on 40 to 50 years, not what our carbon footprint will be like in 10,000 years, but a human scale time frame. But the third element, keeping it positive, is also really important. It's important to have a clear sense of, well, what's a next step that the folks you're talking with can take, whether it's how to be more sustainable on the farm or how to be more sustainable in the city and the life that you lead. So keeping it social, short, and positive is the way that we go with the work that we do. For example, we start with a very simple question. We ask people a very simple request. Picture a place. I'll ask you, Alannah, picture a place, any place in the world that has special meaning to you, that you have a special attachment to. So when I ask you that question, do you have a place that comes to mind, Alannah?
I think home, really. I think the farm at home would be the place that I think of first.
Yeah, sure. The farm where you spend so much time and where you have a lot of emotional energy tied up there. I've done this. I've asked this question of thousands of people all over the United States and several countries in Europe and in Australia. Everybody has a place they care about. So it's a great way to start the conversation. Picture the place that you care about. Then the second question we ask is, picture that place affected by extreme weather or climate change. And when we do that, what we find is that everybody knows what the threat is to the place they care about. For example, I grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana, in the United States. And Hurricane Katrina hit my hometown several years ago, 2005. So when I think about my hometown, that's the place I think of a special place. And I think about flooding as a real danger because the city already flooded. But when we do this work with talking to people, we find that everybody has a place they care about and knows what the threat is. And just by asking those couple of questions, you bring the big global topic of climate change and the climate crisis down to a human scale by keeping it social, short, and then the positive part is also important, which we can talk about. Does that make sense?
Definitely. I think even for me growing up on a farm, the way that climate was introduced to me was very much through doing. And I think that that's something that's very interesting, even in terms of like being out on the farm and kind of seeing the interdependence of different aspects of nature and how everything depends on each other. And it's not a very heavy
Right.
conversation, but it's something that you learn bit by bit as you kind of grow up.
Bit by bit, and it comes up naturally in the course of conversation. Right.
I suppose the second
And
question
having the
really,
conversation.
sorry,
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
I
go ahead.
suppose the second question that I was going to ask really, and I think it's really linked, that there's a drive to mobilize the younger generation, and like how do you mobilize the younger generation, or why should young people listen? And I suppose it's tapping into that idea of why care in the first place, and definitely that's kind of introducing how we talk about conversations like this.
Right. And really, in a way, that gets back to the positive part, right? There's a climate communicator named Ed Maybach at George Mason University. And he says you can summarize the climate crisis in 10 words. And the last two words are really important. It's real. It's bad. It's us. Experts agree. There's hope. There's hope. That's the important part that we have to emphasize in our conversations with young people, I think. That yes, it's real. Yes, it's bad. Yes, it's us. Yes, experts agree that it's happening. And there's hope. And though I always add a couple of other words with action. It's not enough to just hope for the future. We have to work to make that happen. Um, uh, so when I talk with young people about these issues, I talk about the kind of shared future that we have. My future is a little bit of that future because I'm an old guy, but your future is way ahead of you. And it's really clear to me that one of the challenges you and your generation will face is coping much more directly with the climate crisis. So, part of what my generation can do is A, listen and help you think about and talk about that, and B, help you develop what are some strategies that I can take individually and what can we do together to make the world more sustainable for people throughout your long life.
I think that together point is really interesting. And I think often we can kind of alienate groups into what are older people doing, what are younger people doing. But it's when we all kind of come together as a collective that action can really take place. Like what can families do as a group, as a family unit to
That's
actually tackle climate change?
That's right. You know, in our country, in the United States, there's a little bit of these generational squabbles. Oh, your generation doesn't care, or your generation caused this, et cetera. But when we look at the public opinion polling, what we actually find is that there's a lot more agreement that most of the generations agree that we have a challenge, and most of the generations agree that we need to do something about it. But it seems to me that people of the older generation have a real responsibility to listen first to the climate concerns of young people. A recent survey at the University of Bath surveyed 10,000 young adults from all over the world. And what they found was that about 60% of young adults said that they felt ignored or dismissed when they raised climate concerns. And, and that means they felt like they weren't getting the kind of support and help that they needed. Now, part of that might be because people aren't exactly sure what to say, but it seems to me that particularly the older generations have a responsibility to listen and give you direct feedback. Yeah, I hear your concern. I understand that you're worried and you're not alone.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, when we have conversations, sometimes we're talking, but we're not really listening. And it's this idea of, how do we actually make sure that we're actively listening to people and it's not just, waiting for them to finish so you can interject and start off again.
Right. Yeah, that active listening, that's hard work, isn't it? Yeah.
Definitely. And then I suppose, how do you balance the reality of climate change with the fear that so many are feeling? And it can be a fearful thing when you kind of watch documentaries and you see the horrific things that are happening across the world, and you can feel, I suppose, blame, but also a lot of fear. And how do you work with that?
Well, you're right. A lot of people are justifiably concerned. Recent data from the Yale program on climate change communication, one of the best public opinion polling groups on climate, found in an international study that 77% of people in Ireland, 77%, said they were worried about climate change. So the worries and the fear are real. But on the other hand, only 51% of folks in Ireland said that they had heard about climate change at least once during the last week. So we have in Ireland and in the United States what I call a climate silence or a climate avoidance habit. And it goes something like this: climate change. Whoa, it's so big. What can one person do? It just drives me crazy to think about. So I'm just not going to think or talk about it. So almost half of the people in Ireland just don't talk about it much. And that isn't the way we solve problems, right? But just, oh, I'm not going to talk about it. It's a hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil approach to problem solving doesn't really work. So I think one thing that we can all do is talk about it and share our concerns, and then say, okay, what can we do, and where can we start? And the way we start in the work that we do is start where you are. Like, for example, in your farm, I'm sure you started by doing certain things on the farm that led you to larger concerns about your community and Fridays for climate, et cetera. And that's what most people do. They start with what psychologists call small wins, something you can do that you're successful at, and that leads to a pretty simple question, which is, well, what can I do next? What else can I do? So we think it's really important to start where you are, talk about it, and start with, well, what's a first step that I can take? Not that I'm going to solve the whole problem, but what's that first step? Because we know if you take that first step, that leads to bigger outcomes down the road.
Yeah, I think it's interesting what you say about that idea of climate being avoided as a topic of discussion in Ireland. I think a lot of that might come back to as well, contentious issues. And I think we do kind of try to dodge around contentious issues. And if people feel the climate is one and that it'll start an argument, that, it's one you can kind of dodge.
Right. Yeah, you're right. It is a contentious issue. I had a buddy of mine at the gym. He works at the desk at the gym, and I walked in and he said, "Hey, you're doing that climate stuff, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, I don't know about climate change," which is his way of saying, "I'm not going to get into the contentious argument stuff." He said, "I don't know about climate change, but I can tell you, my friends and I go fishing in Canada every year. The streams are different, the fish are different, the insects are different. Something has changed." That's his way of saying, in the part of the world that I pay most attention to, I've seen changes. And that's, again, getting it back to social, a personal connection. He's telling me, I've seen climate change in an area that I really pay attention to.
What do you think my generation will view as a measure of success when we get to our parents' age and we're looking back at climate and kind of saying, have we actually achieved all that much?
Right. First of all, it's an interesting thought and kind of a scary thought experiment, isn't it, to think of yourself as your parents' age, right? Yeah.
Definitely.
Um, in the work I do with young people, a lot of the work I do, I ask people to think 40 to 50 years out. But when I work with young adults, I ask them to just picture themselves at their parents' age. That's about as far out as they can realistically picture. You're asking a very good question. What does success look like from your generation's perspective? And of course, no one answer is going to fit all the people in your generation in Ireland. But it seems to me one of the answers of what success might look like is that your generation can say, we helped face the challenge and stop the process that had been underway for more than 100 years and made the world more sustainable, not only for ourselves, but for future generations. By the way, I'd love it if our generation, my generation, could also give that same answer. Have we stopped the process? Have we helped the world face the challenge and begin the process of reversing the changes that we know have come from human actions?
Do you think that young people's role is kind of to keep adults in check and to kind of let parents know exactly what they should be doing, or does that then cause issues within the family dynamic, or what happens then?
Well, we know that young adults, young people, always feel like they have a lot of answers, right? Also, a lot of questions, which is just part of growing up. We also know, though, that family members are the best climate communicators in the world. If my grandson said to me, "Hey, Pops, I'd like to talk to you for a minute," I'm going to sit down and talk to him. And conversely, if I say, "Hey, Gus or Bailey or Rowan or Teddy, I'd like to talk to you for a minute," they're going to sit down and listen to me for a little while anyway. So family members can be the best climate communicators. In fact, there's a researcher in the United States, Danielle Lawson. Dr. Lawson did an interesting study looking at children communicating with their parents around climate change. And she found that they were very effective in changing their parents' attitudes and behaviors towards the climate crisis, especially daughters with conservative fathers. So it is the case that family members can have a big part to play, particularly in breaking that climate silence or climate avoidance habit pattern that I mentioned earlier. But I don't think it's solely your responsibility. I think it's our whole our collective responsibility.
I think it's interesting too. I mean, we often talk about parents educating their children, but there's definitely a lot that I've learned from my parents as well in terms of the climate. And we won't have the same opinions and ideas, but it's that bouncing ideas off each other and bouncing opinions and kind of figuring things out. And I think, maybe the world has got a bit more hectic in the last couple of years. There's a lot of things that were done 100 years ago that maybe we'll actually be returning to and looking into the past and saying, they had less stressful lives than we have.
Yeah. Well, COVID has made us slow down in a lot of ways and caused us to rethink a lot of things. That's for sure. It is the case that generations, when it works well, are sharing ideas and perspectives. And that's really a very helpful process around climate and a lot of other things.
I think the next question then is kind of how do we move from, maybe eco-anxiety or maybe that kind of silence to climate action? And, maybe we've kind of answered that question a bit already in terms of actually actively communicating and learning things from each other. But what else is really required for climate action?
Well, one of the things that we do in the work that Growing Greener, the group that I've organized, does, we've really tried to lay out climate actions that individuals can take. There are other groups that do the same thing. For example, Project Drawdown has put out a lot of information about what individuals can do. Not that we think, it's all the responsibility of individuals to solve the climate crisis. No, but we realize that without activating people, without getting people engaged, then the policymakers in business and in government won't feel the pressure to make changes until they realize that the citizens are very concerned and share their concern about climate change. So we really focus on first getting people to see what they're already doing. If you step back and think about what are the ways, for example, in your family that you already take climate action, and then what's one next thing that you can do? This is where the positive part comes in. What's a next step on your climate journey? And then take that next step. And what we find is when people do that, they quickly ask, well, yeah, I can do that individually, but what can we do together? And it's that collective action that then leads to bigger changes. But I want to go back to the climate silence because a lot of times we don't even realize how much our concern is shared or what other people are already doing who live around us or even with us. For example, a lot of times in when I'm teaching, I'll give my students an assignment of having a climate conversation with somebody from a different generation, a parent, grandparent, aunt, uncle, neighbor, and then come back and write up a paragraph about how it went. And many of my students say, that's the first time I've had a serious conversation about the climate issue with my parent or grandparent. I had no idea, A, that they were concerned, or B, what they were already doing. And that then led to other conversations about what else could we do and that sort of thing. So I would say the first thing that we all can do is have that conversation.
Do you think we do place too much emphasis on kind of individual action and not enough on kind of holding governments to account? Or is there a balance that we should be trying to reach?
Well, I think individual action is necessary, but not sufficient. That is that once you get people taking individual action, then it seems to me it's easier to get them to come together and take action together, collective action. It's very hard to hold our policymakers and our business leaders and other sector leaders responsible if you're not talking about the issue and you don't realize how shared the concern is. For example, I did some work with a church recently. They had 30 people come to a potluck after services, and then they did our climate activity. And just having 30 people together, they realized, oh, there's more of a depth of concern in the church than we thought because we didn't talk about it. Now, seeing that what we can do collectively, they began to do a variety of things. They ended up with solar panels on the church as a symbol of their stewardship and the like. So it went from that individual action, what can I do alone, to realizing I can do a lot more together with others. So it was necessary to have that individual conversation, but it wasn't sufficient to get the collective action. But without that individual action, they wouldn't have had the pathway onto the collective action. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think I'm actually still really interested in what you were saying about how children can have such an impact on their parents, and particularly, younger daughters on conservative fathers. And I was kind of curious as to why you think that pattern actually showed up.
Oh, that's a very good question, and I would have to say, of course, that was in the United States, in the United States political context, and it may or may not carry over to Ireland. But I would say this: I think that we certainly know that parents influence children, and psychologists have known for a long time that the influence goes both ways, right? I've learned a lot from my kids and grandkids, not only about new technology and new ninja characters, but also they're asking questions. Why? I have a 6-year-old grandson, Bailey, who since age 2 has been asking why. That's his one word mantra, why? And getting you to reflect on why and engage him, you realize, well, maybe I don't know. Let's go look that up together. But the point is, both generations, both sides learn a lot from each other. And it starts with that climate conversation and being open to it.
I think we've definitely heard a lot more about eco-anxiety over the last couple of years, but I think some people are actually still quite confused, and I think I am to a certain extent about what it actually is. It's not something I've ever experienced, but I know people who have, but I'm not sure I actually understand the concept of eco-anxiety.
Well, eco-anxiety is a type of anxiety related to our ecological crisis, right? And anxiety is a set of both feelings, physical and emotional, that's related to lack of control, and for some people, a sense of dread or foreboding. And this gets back to what I was saying earlier, that climate change is real. We know it's happening. We know it's bad. The United States is just suffering through a major hurricane in Florida. The strength of that hurricane is directly related to the energy in the waters of the Gulf of Mexico. So we know, and that's related to climate change. So we know it's real. So there's a reality out there. The question is, how do we cope with it? What are the strategies to help us cope with it? And one of those strategies is to get us to reflect on the self-statements, the sentences we tell ourselves about climate change. One of those sentences is, it's so big and there's nothing anybody can do. Well, it is big, but as Ed Maybach said in his last 2 words, there's hope. There are a variety of things that people can and are doing, and but I add, with action. There's hope with action. There's hope because of action. So eco-anxiety is sort of reality-based, but then exaggerated, so to speak. And that's why the positive part, or the there's hope part, is really important to emphasize.
Do you think that eco-anxiety is the main thing stopping people from taking action on climate, or do you think it's much broader than that?
Well, psychologists have a saying, all behavior is overdetermined. That means there's usually more than one cause for any behavior, right? So I think people not taking action on climate change is caused by a lot of things. One is, it's really hard. It's a hard thing to do psychologically, because when we think about climate change, we're asking ourselves to think across time and across distance, across space, right? So the action I take today may have an impact 60, 70, 80 years down the road for people in another part of the world. That's really hard to think about. I'm not seeing the direct impact. It's not like my 3-year-old grandson throws something, he sees a direct impact. No, I'm asking him to think, okay, maybe not him, but his brothers and others to think 60, 70 years down the road around the world. That is really hard. That's why the idea of personalizing it, bringing it down to a human scale, to a place you care about, where you can think about what the impacts are that you can already see or envision, is really important. So I would give ourselves a little bit of a break in that it's really hard. We're asking people to do a hard thing, and that's hard work.
Do you think that pattern is going to kind of change of people not being able to see so far into the future across the world as we start to see climate affect us a bit more and a bit more directly? Can you see people's kind of psychological approach changing?
Maybe. The reason I say maybe is that I think as humans, we have a great capacity to distance ourselves psychologically from concern, from harm. So in the United States and in Ireland, if you ask people, is climate change happening? They say yes. 87% of people in Ireland say, yeah, climate change is happening. But if you ask them, is it going to affect me? Then the percentages really shrink. And then they shift to say, well, it's going to happen to future generations, or it's going to happen over to other parts of the world, but it's not going to happen to me. It's not going to happen in Ireland, not going to affect the people I care about. So that's why we have to sort of break through that avoidance or denial and help people see that even in places that I care about right now, I know what the concerns are. The one question I ask people sometimes in the work that we do is picture the place that you care about. Now picture what you'd like it to look like in 40 to 50 years, or by the time you're your parents' age. What would you like your farm to look like in 40 to 50 years? And I used to say, older people my age or older, would say what it used to look like 10, 20, 30 years ago. And I used to say older people are living climate memory. I don't say that anymore. You know why? Because recently I've had people your age and a little bit older, Alannah, people in high school and college in the United States, tell me, I'd like the place that I care about to look like it looked like 10 years ago, which says to me that even in your relatively young lives, you're living climate memory too. We're all living climate memory now. And because of that, I think your question is a good one. I think we will begin to see the avoidance and denial shrink because we're all seeing the places that we care about affected by climate change. So it's a lot harder to deny it. It's less and less over there or far away and far in the future.
We're almost out of time, Mick and Alannah. Alannah, do you have any final questions for Mick? The conversation is so fascinating.
Yeah, it is. I suppose my last question would be, we've kind of talked about it already as to, with all the information that's out there about climate, why people aren't changing, and there's lots of different reasons. But how do we kind of help people to start changing as from a real community-based perspective? Is there one thing that people could do that would really stand out that people can do, in the next week or 2 weeks, kind of short actions that can happen straight away, or do we have to be looking more long term?
Well, there's a climate communicator in the United States, Catherine Hayhoe, who is really world famous for being a great climate communicator. And Catherine Hayhoe says, if you're going to do one thing, only one thing, the one thing you should do, the one thing all of us should do, is talk about climate change. Each of us has the ability to begin that climate conversation. And in that beginning, that then leads to actions. But it starts with having a climate conversation. So if everybody who's hearing our conversation now made a commitment that in the next week, I'm going to have a climate conversation with somebody I have not talked to about this, that would be an important first step. And in that, how do you start that conversation? you might start by saying, hey, picture a place that do you have a place you really care about a lot? And got that place in mind? Now, is that place going to be affected by climate change or extreme weather? What would that look like? Begin it that way. Keep it social, place you care about. Short time frame, what's it going to look like? And then what's your aspiration for the next 40 to 50 years for that place? And then positive. What can you do about it to work towards that vision that you have, whether it's in Cork or in the United States or wherever you are? Start by having that climate conversation and breaking the climate silence habit.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Professor Mick Smyer and Alannah Wrynn. It was really great to hear different generations in different countries and different viewpoints as well. And I think Let's Talk About Climate Change being the title of this webinar, it's a completely fitting way to end this conversation. Mick and Alannah, thanks very much. It was an absolute pleasure to hear your conversation and to be joined by you. Thank you very much. Thanks again to Mick Smyer and Alannah Wrynn for that really honest and engaging conversation. I think there are some great takeaways from it. And now we continue our conversations on this Let's Talk About Climate Change webinar with our third and final segment. I'm delighted to say that to represent the viewpoints of older people on climate action, I'm joined by Liz Downs from County Cork Older Persons Council. And also I am joined today by Daryl Walsh. Darragh is a transition year student in Bandon Grammar School. He's an advocate for the environment, equality and reformed education. This year, he became a member of Cork County Comhairle and is also an Irish second-level Students' Union elected member. Darragh is also a youth advocate with YMCA Ireland, as well as being involved with Future Generations Climate Justice Group, the Global Justice and International Development Committee, and he's a member of Youth Reporters Programme. Welcome to you both. Darragh, at this point, I'm going to hand over to you to pose some questions to Liz.
Thank you very much, Mary. And hi, Liz.
Hi, Darragh. All good.
Yeah. I'd like to ask you, can you recall when the conversations first started around climate change and climate action?
Oh, I surely can, Darragh, because I'm involved in community work here in Mitchelstown, and the topic of the conversation was about 10 years of climate change. And I thought, God, climate change, that's interesting.
Cool. And have you noticed any gradual changes in Ireland's climate over the years?
Oh my God, big time, Darragh. I remember we had seasons. We had summer, spring, summer, autumn and winter. Now, every day we can have 4 seasons. So it's horrendous, and we enjoyed lovely sunshine. We enjoyed the winter. It might be cold, but we were prepared for it. But today, you can have winter clothes on today, even in the summertime, and you can have summer clothes in the wintertime. It's so different.
Wow. And how did you cope with this summer? How did you find it?
Oh, this summer was great. Like that now, the rays of the sun, I think, are stronger nowadays. I don't ever remember putting on moisture or putting on sun cream when we were young. I don't think it was heard of. Maybe it was just us, but, we didn't need it and we didn't get burned by the sun because the rays weren't as strong. So, it's about, plastering yourself really with sun cream nowadays.
Wow. And how concerned are you about climate change?
Oh, I'd be very serious about it. I'd be worried because especially the third world where there's lots of drought and they have hurricanes and even presently out in America. And ourselves here, we are encountering storms that I never heard of. And I mean, I'm 73 years of age and I've never come across the storms that we're encountering at the moment. And even today out there, it's windy, it's stormy, it's rainy, it's definitely totally different.
Okay. So what changes have you and your peers made in relation to sustainability?
Always make big changes, and we believe, in having positive changes. We be careful when we're going shopping that we bring our own bags. We watch what we buy, that, whatever packages that are on the items, like vegetables or fruit or whatever, that they're recyclable, because we're all down to be about reduce, reuse and recycle. And I think they're brilliant 3 words for young people and older people. And I think what's very important for us as older people is we're being educated by the young. because the young people are learning in school how to do all these different things to promote climate change, and we are listening to them, and vice versa, they are listening to us, and we're cooperating with them, and we're very enthusiastic about making Ireland and Mitchellstown and the whole country and the whole world a better place to live in.
Very well said. Do you think there's enough time to reverse the damages of climate change? And do you think there's enough motivation throughout the generations to do so?
I think, what's done is done. So we have to look forward. Yeah. And we are creating a better society. We are, being aware that climate change, that we have to do something. And we as older people, we can be a role model for the young people. We, around the house, not to be using non-toxic deodorants or sprays. We're careful not to use too much water. We're careful about we plant a tree, we look after our garden, we're out in the air more. All that kind of thing, encourages the young people to follow. So we hope, between the generations, that we can all come together and make it a better place.
Awesome. Have you seen any positive changes within the green agenda?
Oh God, yeah. It might come slowly. It's not going to happen today or tomorrow, even though I wish it would happen as soon as possible. But yeah, people are cycling to school, people are walking, people even at night time there, and I live out the country, and you'd see people walking their dog, looking after animals, there is, and the farmers as well. I'm a farmer's wife myself, and we are very conscious of the emissions that farmers are causing as well. And, I can see big changes, slowly but surely.
Okay. And do you see any challenges in being more green on the farm?
Oh, yeah. Climate change is all about challenges, no matter what way we look at it. And even in Leave No Trace, that's a special programme that the government have put in place as well. And it's if people that are out hill walking, people that are mountain climbing, keep to the footpaths, mind the wild animals, close gates after them. All that is all incorporated into having a happier society. And leave nothing but your footprints and take nothing but photos. That's the main theme about Leave No Trace. And I think, energy efficient light bulbs and plant a tree, shop wisely, all these different things, and put them all together, and we have a great place.
Brilliant. And if you could leave one message to the people watching today, what would you say?
Well, I would say, look at your place. What can you do to support the Green Party, to support your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren that will be coming up after you? What kind of a place would you like to leave them in? And if we all thought of that, do we want the place that we enjoyed so much ourselves when we were young? Do we want that there for the next generation? Yes, we do. If we do, then we need to take action now. And I think reduce, reuse, recycle, educate yourself on how simple you can change things and how it's achievable for everyone. And don't do it tomorrow or the day after. Start today. Today is the day to start. And Darren, young people like yourself, and it's great to see that you're so into climate change and that you're one of these people that will talk up for us all, and well done.
Thank you very much, Liz. Thank you,
Darren. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much to Liz and Darragh for that really interesting discussion. And that's where Let's Talk About Climate Change comes to a close. Thanks again to Cork County Council for facilitating this webinar. Today was all about starting conversations. And if you want to find out more about sustainable development, please visit www.gov.ie/SDGs. A huge thanks also to you, our audience, for joining us today. We hope that you can take some interesting and important information away with you today about climate change and climate action. Take care.